Welcome back to another RMT video. I am T Pokepals, joined by Panther-T and Streams.
What's up?
What's up, guys?
Hello.
And so, in this video, we're going to talk about how to rate a team. And before we get into how to rate, we're going to answer a few questions, like why you should bother rating, and what does it mean to rate a team. Rating is a term used to describe an action in which you provide feedback to a user for the team. While providing feedback, your goal or aim is to improve the team you are rating, hence the reason people want to rate or feedback for the team.
So there are two main points on how rating a team can help improve your own skills, and the first one of those would be obviously building. And by rating a lot of teams, it's easier to recognize common weaknesses and how you can fix your own teams. Another thing would be in battling, and that it's a lot easier to find the structures of teams and what could break those teams through rating.
Yeah. In addition to this, when you're battling as well, you're going to notice weaknesses or threats to your team much more easily because you have gained experience in identifying them through rating. And this can lead to an improvement in your team building skills, and it also helps with your ability to defeat your opponents, because your increased knowledge from rating can help mentally break down an opponent's team. And when rating a team, you're also improving your own ability to build your own teams, which also helps with predicting your opponents, and this overall will improve your skill. Now, for instance, if by rating a team, you've learned that on a bulky offensive team in OU, they heavily rely on the Laddie twins to check Keldeo. So if you're in a battle against a similar build, you can predict if they would go into Latios, double into T-Tar, and trap it. And so that's a good example of how rating a team will help improve your skill in the long run.
As for the material rewards that are obtainable through rating teams, you can earn the Team Raider badge on Spellgun forums, or you can earn the room voice or higher in the RMT room found on the Showdown server. So before you start rating, you probably ask yourself, what do I need to start rating? Are there any requirements?
First big one is Medicating Knowledge. This refers to being able to know common threats, sets, and switch-ins for each mon in the tier. And among this, you should also be familiar with Pokemon that are in lower tiers that'll be used. For example, let's say you're playing OU, but Suicune's a UU team, but it's still used in OU, so you'd have to know its OU usage. Learning as many Pokemon and how they're used as much as you can will only help you in the end. It's also to keep in mind what Pokemon aren't being used. For example, things that aren't as common, such as Chandelure. Even though it's fairly decent in OU, it's just not used a lot, so it shouldn't be as played for as heavily as, let's say, Keldeo.
Yeah, and in addition to this, to find out how much something is used, usage stats, which are posted quite regularly, are useful to find them. So now we're moving on to a subject that applies mostly to rating on PS, and this is etiquette when rating. So one thing, it's really important to keep in mind that not everyone who posts a team is going to be the most experienced MLG Pro Mon Battler 2016. And as such, they might not understand your advice right away. Now, while this might seem obvious, and you might think, why am I telling you this? You'd be very surprised by how blunt and be in their approach to new raiders who have new teams. So what I'm trying to say is take the time to explain each of your choices in a very clear and simple manner to help them understand. Likewise, only give constructive criticism. Don't make rude comments because those will just lead nowhere. In fact, all it does is lead to the raidee ignoring your advice, because they're going to get defensive if you insult their team, essentially. So always try to approach in a positive tone. And also remember that you're speaking to a person over PS, and that no one really deserves to be disrespected for being poor at team building, because everyone was at some point. Remember that you're there to help. And this is important on PS. You're talking to them directly, and unlike the forums where you rate and it'll take some time for someone to respond, people on there will respond to you immediately. So the importance of explaining clearly and concisely, more important on PS. If you can't justify a change, then why should anyone take that advice?
Alright, so the next big one is format. And this one applies more to forums than on PS, but basically this refers to the presentation of the rate. When you see a rate on forums, or even in the RMT room, you don't want to see a giant block of text, nor do you want to see a mess that looks hard to decipher. So by formatting your rates, or by making them more aesthetically pleasing, you'll be making it easier for others to read and understand your rate. You don't have to go overboard and turn it into a rainbow, but doing things like making a separate paragraph for a certain suggestion as opposed to a giant block of text, for all of those changes would make an example of making it easier for users to get through. That and seeing a giant block just kind of discourages people from raiding it. And I'll get into more detail when we go over the example right at the end of the video. So as of that, we've covered the requirements for rating. So now it's time to move on to the actual rating process. And
So, the first step in rating a team is understanding or learning more about the team and how it was created.
next, you need to properly identify what the team struggles with offensively and defensively. It's important to not only know what a threat is, but also what makes that mon a threat. Are teams of that style typically weak to that Pokemon, or does that team in particular lack a switch in or counterplay to that one?
Identifying threats is a good first step. However, why bother identifying a threat if you're not going to propose a solution? So as such, you need to find solutions to the threats described in the previous step. You should make changes that help to manage those threats. And this can include explaining switch-ins and counterplay, running a certain move to help lure and defeat those threats, or providing the team with an easier way of revenge killing that threat. And the way you deal with threats also depends on the type of team you're raiding. If it's an offensive team, generally you would make changes like adding a revenge killer, creating an overload core, which is essentially two mons that have similar checks that work together to break down those checks. A good example of that being bird spam, like Talonflame and Mega and Pinsir, help to break down Lando and Rotom together. However, in contrast, the defensive team focuses more on walling certain threats, rather than offensive pressure and revenge killing.
Now, you should have an idea how to combat some threats, but you're not quite sure how to change the team. So in this step, you'll see how you can replace on the team if necessary to help with a threat. Sometimes you won't necessarily need to replace them on, but rather change a set or two, and that'll do the trick. So it's important to not always jump the gun and just start replacing things. If you do replace something, then consider what the team loses from losing that mon. So this will lead us to step 5. One of the biggest issues that is seen in raids is that after the previous step, raiders don't even look back at the team and see if any more weaknesses were opened. By this, we mean by getting rid of one thing, this may open up a new threat. However, some people won't necessarily look at this, and this may even make the team even weaker.
If you did make the team weaker to something, then go back and repeat steps 3 to 5 until the team has reliable counterplay to common threats. Counterplay includes switch-ins, being able to defeat or KO that threat, and revenge killing it. So this next step is more exclusive to forums, and in this step you want to make sure that the format of your raid is easy to get through. And the same goes for your explanations. If you explain changes with easy to understand statements and your raid looks all organized and neat, it'll be much easier for people to read and get through. Remember, try to not change too much, and most significantly, do not change the focal point of the team. Even if you make the team better by changing like 5 Pokemon out of 6, have you really rated the team, or did you end up remaking it? While there is no sold amount of how much you can change, it's important to try not to change more than 3, because that way you'll maintain the same team that the person made, and you'll just have improved it instead of remaking it. Now that we've gone over the rating process, it's time to go through an example raid.
So this was just an example team that we came up with to use. It has not really been battle tested, and as such, this team does have quite a few flaws. And also, it's important to keep in mind this isn't 100% foolproof raid. This is just a very, very brief example to help us illustrate what we explained previously. So, looking at the team, do you guys want to go into some threats that you identify?
Yeah, so I'll go over the defensive threats first, and that would be Chansey and Sableye, or specifically just Stall in general. And although Manaphy is a good stall breaker, if Manaphy in any way gets weakened or dies, then Stall just beats the entire team.
Alright, and then as for the offensive threats, like just looking at the team, Weavile can really just click knockoff on anything except Garchomp, I guess. And then, but that still dies any ice move. And then Alakazam, it gets outsped by Excadrill before it Mega Evolves. And then Excadrill is in a similar boat where it can, in Sand especially, it outspeeds everything. It has a high chance to do a KO Garchomp, even the defensive variants. And then Zardex, similar, where like after one Dragon Dance, it can just cleanly like 1-hit KO everything.
Yeah, especially Earthquake variants, which are becoming more common these days now. Now that we've looked at the threats to the team, what you should do is think, okay, how can I change the team in as little changes as possible to help address these threats?
The first big change would be to change from Rocky Helmet Garchomp to Rocky Helmet Landorus. And this was mostly for that aforementioned Excadrill, especially the Scarf variant, in that it can no longer just spam Earthquake and hit everything. And now we have a good switch-in to Excadrill.
And a good sand check in general.
Yeah, and also for Charizard X as Lando, it can lower its attack, and then also if Charizard does want to KO Lando, it'll take a ton of recoil damage to where it should be easy enough to revenge kill possibly. And then the other change would be changing Manaphy to Keldeo, because Keldeo, it can defeat Chansey and Mega Sableye with ease, and it also can switch into Weavile and defeat it easily too. And then
Go ahead, Panther.
Okay, I elected to put Taunt over Substitute because replacing Manaphy with Keldeo makes the stall matchup even more difficult, and Taunt just helps to break down fatter teams in general. Of course, with Taunt, Bisharp becomes more threatening. There's no way to evade Sucker Punch, and the rare AV variants could just Pursuit Trap you. However, I felt personally that adding Keldeo would be sufficient for handling with Bisharp. So, anybody want to go over the very last change?
We ended up putting Scarf over Leftovers on Jirachi, as we already have Heatran to be switching into Dragon moves, but then, other than Alakazam, we really just lack raw speed on this team. Jirachi is a good way to not only gain momentum through U-turn, a fast U-turn, but it's also good late game to be faster than most mons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then when facing opposing Mega Alakazams, nothing on our team outspeeds it. And then if our Alakazam has a Mega yet, then we're in deep trouble. So having something like Jirachi to outspeed it and quick U-turn and gain momentum like that, and possibly KO it, is all just really helpful in the end. And then also when facing Weavile, since Jirachi, it'll outspeed Weavile before it can get hit by a Dark move, and then quick U-turn or Iron Head and KO it before it gets KO'd.
Mm-hmm. As mentioned, these are just a summary. This wasn't like most in-depth rate 2016 rating contest. Just a quick rate to show you guys what we were talking about beforehand. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add?
I'd say if you go and you get your team rated and you're not quite satisfied with what they did, I would say go ahead and take those changes, just make another copy of the team, and then test them and see how that goes, instead of just acting like it didn't happen.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. Because changing the team, there could be two different ways to approach something, like two different ways to handle a threat. And a lot of times people can't see it. I don't think I have anything else to add. How about you guys?
Let's see, when you actually look at the team, so like in the order of ratings, so since we added Lando T over Garchomp first, see Garchomp, it's a really good answer to Mega Scizor. And so, if we kept Manaphy, then really Heatran would be like the initial mon to help deal with Scizor, assuming Jirachi and Latios don't have fire coverage. So that would make us slightly more Scizor weak, because if Heatran goes down, because it can get worn down with Leftovers being its only recovery. So Keldeo really helps with that. Yeah, so Keldeo is able to help, deter Scizor. Skull Burn is always nice, and it really just does a ton of damage.
Okay, cool. So I think with that said, we are good to move on to the conclusion.
Alright, so there's our example rate, and I hope by the end of the video, you now know how to rate a team. If you have any questions regarding rating, or would like a feedback on a rate, feel free to message an official team leader on Smogon, or email us.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.